Do you have any reaction or apology to the women at the center of this?
Do you know what the outcome of this is? They're going to go to federal prison. Federal prison.
Well, let's get one thing clear. Brock Lesnar does what Brock Lesnar wants to do.
I don't know. What's the do I need to reflect? No, I don't need to reflect.
UFC fighters built the biggest combat sport on earth, sold millions of pay-per-views, and became global superstars. Then failed drug tests.
See, those people are nothing but a bunch of crooks up there.
Illegal strikes and backstage brawls.
Oh, I'm glad I got the recipe.
Let's talk about that opening sequence.
Maybe not. If you shot, hey, come over here, say my face.
Turned champions into criminals. Here are the scandals that changed everything. Trust me, you won't believe what happens at number 23. Now, without further ado, ranked in no particular order, here are 25 of the most controversial moments in UFC history. Number 1, Conor McGregor rape case. The most recent controversy in UFC history involves the biggest star the sport has ever seen, Conor McGregor.
Mr. McGregor, you're a rapist.
Devious coward is how he was described in court.
Do you have any reaction or apology to the women at the center of this?
In November 2024, a woman named Nikita Hand took Conor to civil court in Ireland, accusing him of sexually assaulting her in a Dublin hotel penthouse back in December 2018.
I hope my story is a reminder that no matter how afraid you might be, speak up, you have a voice, and keep on fighting for justice. Now that justice has been served, I can now try and move on and look forward to the future with my family and friends and daughter.
The case went to trial, and Hand testified that McGregor pinned her down, choked her 3 times, and brutally assaulted her, leaving her with severe bruising and trauma. After 8 days of evidence and deliberation, the jury found Conor liable for assault and ordered him to pay nearly $250,000 in damages. This wasn't a criminal trial, it was civil, which means a different burden of proof.
There were 8 days of graphic, explicit evidence here in Dublin, in this, a civil, not criminal case.
But the verdict still shocked the world. Major sponsors immediately started dropping McGregor, including Proper 12 Whiskey, which removed his image from all marketing, and IO Interactive, which pulled him from the Hitman video game series. Conor maintained his innocence throughout, said he would appeal, and claimed the encounter was consensual. But the damage to his reputation was catastrophic. This remains one of the darkest clouds hanging over the biggest star in MMA history. Dana White slaps wife on New Year's Eve going into 2023. Video leaked of UFC President Dana White and his wife Ann getting into a physical altercation at El Squid Row nightclub in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. The video showed Ann slapping Dana across the face, and then Dana immediately slapping her back. Before bystanders separated them, both fighters appeared heavily intoxicated. The footage went viral within hours, and the backlash was immediate. Fans, media outlets, and domestic violence advocates called for Dana to step down or be fired, pointing out the hypocrisy of a combat sports promoter engaging in domestic violence. The UFC is owned by Endeavor, a massive publicly traded company that you'd think would have to act on something this serious. Dana released an apology video saying they both had too much to drink and that there's no excuse for putting hands on a woman.
What happened on New Year's Eve is my mistake, not theirs. And obviously, nobody's more about free speech than me. If one of the fighters wants to come out and voice their opinion on it and whatever it might be, then by all means. I'm sure you guys have seen the TMZ video and seen my interview. It was obviously a horrible personal experience, and there's no excuses for it. Something that I'm gonna have to deal with.
His wife Ann also released a statement saying it was out of character, and they'd worked through it as a family. No suspension, no fine, no financial penalty whatsoever.
No, are there any repercussions planned from the company or self-imposed repercussions?
Yeah, well, I mean, what should the repercussions be? You tell me. I take 30 days off. How does that hurt me? I mean, I told you guys when we were going through COVID could last 10 years. I could sit it out and, you know what I mean? What would be the problem? It's much like COVID, actually. me leaving hurts the company, hurts my employees, hurts the fighters. Doesn't hurt me. I could have left in 2016. You know what I mean? I don't know. Do I need to reflect? No, I don't need to reflect.
Dana White is still the president of the UFC today like nothing ever happened. This set a disturbing precedent about accountability at the highest levels of the sport.
And what is my punishment? Here's my punishment. I got to walk around for however long I live. Is it 10.4 years or is it another 25 years? And I gotta, this is how I'm labeled now. My other punishment is that, you know, I'm sure a lot of people, whether it be media, fighters, friends, acquaintances who had respect for me might not have respect for me now.
3. War Machine attempted murder.
All right, thanks, Masa. And now we have a breaking news update. War Machine was sentenced today to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 36 years. 13 Action News reporter Yasmin Hassan was there as the judge handed down the sentence.
War Machine. Real name Jonathan Koppenhaver was a UFC veteran who appeared on The Ultimate Fighter and had a decent run in the sport, competing for both the UFC and Bellator. But in August 2014, everything changed when War Machine showed up unannounced at his ex-girlfriend Christy Mack's Las Vegas home in the middle of the night. Christy Mack was an adult film actress, and when War Machine arrived, he found her in bed with another man, Corey Thomas. War Machine attacked Thomas first, beating him severely before forcing him to leave. Then he turned his rage on Christy. For nearly 2 hours, War Machine brutally assaulted her, breaking 18 bones around her eyes, fracturing her nose, knocking out teeth, breaking multiple ribs, and rupturing her liver. He cut off her hair with a dull kitchen knife, and at one point told her, "Now, I have to kill you, I've gone too far." Christy testified she genuinely thought she was going to die that night. When War Machine went back to the kitchen to get another knife, Christy managed to escape to a neighbor's house. War Machine fled and went on the run for over a week before being captured by police in California. He was convicted of 29 felony counts, including attempted murder, sexual assault, and domestic battery.
News update. War Machine was sentenced today to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 36 years. 13 Action News reporter Yasmin Hassan was there as the judge handed down the sentence.
War Machine is now serving life in Nevada State Prison with eligibility for parole in 36 years. Number 4, Conor McGregor bus attack. In April 2018, during UFC 223 Fight Week in Brooklyn, Khabib Nurmagomedov confronted Conor's teammate Artem Lobov backstage at Media Day. Khabib got in Artem's face with his team surrounding him, telling him to watch what he says about Khabib in interviews. When Conor heard about this back in Dublin, he completely lost his mind. Conor chartered a private jet, flew from Ireland to New York, and showed up at the Barclays Center with about 20 people from his crew. They stormed into the loading dock area where fighter buses were parked, and Conor knew exactly which bus Khabib was on. Conor grabbed a metal dolly and launched it at the bus window, shattering glass everywhere. Michael Chiesa was sitting right by the window and suffered multiple facial lacerations that required medical attention. Ray Borg got glass shards in his eyes, causing corneal abrasions. Rose Namajunas, another fighter on the bus, was traumatized by the incident. 3 fights had to be pulled from UFC 223. The entire card was thrown into chaos just days before the event. Conor was arrested by NYPD and charged with multiple counts of assault and criminal mischief, including felony charges. But here's the crazy part. Conor took a plea deal, avoided jail time, did some community service, paid some fines, and was back fighting Khabib for the title just 7 months later. The UFC marketed the fight using footage of the bus attack, turning Conor's criminal assault into promotional material. Number 5. UFC 229. Brawl. The UFC 229 build-up was unlike anything the sport had ever seen. Conor went after everything Khabib's religion, calling him a mad, backward Kayet. His father, his country, his Dagestani culture, nothing was off limits.
Oh, slap him then. Do something about it. What are you going to do about that? He's at the disrespecting you. Do something then, I'll just shut your mouth.
Khabib stayed completely silent during the entire build-up. He didn't respond to any of it. He just waited for fight night. October 6, 2018, Las Vegas T-Mobile Arena and Khabib came to destroy Conor. Khabib dropped him in round 2, mauled him on the ground, talked trash the entire time, and in round 4 locked in a neck crank submission. Conor tapped it was over. Khabib was still undefeated. But that's when everything went absolutely insane. Khabib's teammate and Bellator fighter Dillon Danis was sitting cage-side screaming at Khabib, calling him every name in the book. Khabib had enough. He jumped over the cage and went straight at Danis, sparking a brawl. Meanwhile, members of Khabib's team jumped into the octagon and attacked Conor, who was still recovering from the submission. It turned into a full-scale riot with security trying to break up multiple fights fans, throwing drinks, debris flying everywhere. 3 members of Khabib's team were arrested but released after Conor refused to press charges. The Nevada Athletic Commission initially withheld Khabib's entire $2 million purse, then eventually released half. Khabib was fined $500,000 and suspended 9 months. This was the biggest pay-per-view in UFC history, 2.4 million buys, and it ended with one of the biggest brawls in sports history. Jon Jones hit and run.
UFC champion Jon Jones is out of the fight game and back in legal trouble. Just days after announcing his retirement, Jones is facing new criminal charges.
Jon Jones is widely considered the most talented fighter to ever step foot in the octagon, but he's also the most controversial, and nothing showed that better than April 2015.
They split throats. They're the most evil people you'll ever meet.
That's Jon Jones.
Jon Jones?
Mm-hmm. He was the one driving the vehicle.
Jon had just beaten Daniel Cormier in January to successfully defend his light heavyweight title. He was on top of the world youngest champion ever, GOAT conversations everywhere. And then on April 26, 2015, around 9 a.m. in the morning, Jones got behind the wheel, allegedly high on cocaine, and ran a red light in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Jones crashed into another vehicle that had a pregnant woman inside. And here's the part that makes this unforgivable. Jon didn't stay to help. He fled the scene on foot, ran away, then came back to grab cash and marijuana from his rental car, then fled again, leaving the pregnant woman shaken with minor injuries. Witnesses saw the whole thing and called police. When police searched Jon's abandoned rental car, they found marijuana pipes confirming he was driving under the influence. The UFC had no choice. Jones was immediately stripped of the light heavyweight title. He was arrested and charged with felony hit and run because leaving the scene of an accident with injuries is a felony in New Mexico. Jones eventually took a plea deal, received 18 months supervised probation, and was suspended from fighting. This was supposed to be Jon's prime years. Instead, it became the first of many, many legal controversies that would define his career outside the cage.
But they definitely listen to conversations like this, and some of them are more than enough to kill you.
Number 7, Jon Jones. UFC 232. Card relocation. UFC 232 was scheduled for December 29, 2018 in Las Vegas. Jon Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson rematch for the light heavyweight title. Fight week arrives. Everyone's in Vegas, tickets, sold hotels, booked entire card set to go. And then just 6 days before the event, USADA reports that Jon Jones tested positive for Turnbull metabolites, the same steroid he'd been popped for before. The Nevada Athletic Commission said, "We don't have enough time to properly review this. We're not clearing Jon Jones to fight in our state."
The Nevada Athletic Commission will not license Jon Jones to fight on Saturday in Las Vegas due to an adverse drug test finding.
So what did Dana White do? He didn't cancel the fight. He didn't postpone it. Dana moved the entire UFC 232 event from Las Vegas to Los Angeles with just 6 days' notice.
So, this weekend's fight is moving from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. Uh-oh.
Thousands of fans who bought tickets in Vegas now had to scramble some, couldn't make it, and lost their money. Fighters had to relocate their entire training camps. Families, cornermen, medical staff, everything on 6 days' notice.
Do you think that Jon Jones is a cheater?
I think if something is in your system, something's in your system, and it doesn't get there without your knowledge.
The California State Athletic Commission rushed to approve the event and cleared Jones to fight. The UFC's justification was that the levels were so low it was just residual from previous use pulsing effect. Jon fought, won the title, and faced basically zero consequences for failing another drug test.
bit disappointed it's going to cost all of us. You know, I don't think it's going to cost Jon Jones much, but
it was one of the most blatant examples of the UFC protecting a star at everyone else's expense.
You know, it's definitely unfortunate that a product of one person, just you know, everything around Jon Jones, we all have to kind of pay for it. And I don't mean that in a monetary way. I just mean that in a sense like, oh, we got to shift the car, we got to, you know, pull up shop, move elsewhere, and kind of deal with all this stuff. But I'm just focused on the fight.
8. Brock Lesnar, UFC 200. Drug cheat. There's a rule in the UFC that returning fighters need to be in the USADA testing pool for 6 months before they can compete well. The UFC bent that rule in the most obvious way possible for their biggest draw.
Well, let's get one thing clear. Brock Lesnar does what Brock Lesnar wants to do.
UFC 200 in July 2016 was supposed to be the biggest card in company history, but it was falling apart. Jon Jones got pulled for failing a drug test. Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 2 got moved to UFC 202. Dana White desperately needed a star to save UFC 200. So the UFC worked out a special exemption with USADA that allowed Brock Lesnar to skip the mandatory 6-month testing window and fight Mark Hunt on just 3 weeks' notice. Brock hadn't fought in MMA since 2011. He'd been doing WWE full-time. Everyone knew something was up. Brock came in, looked massive, fought Mark Hunt, and won a unanimous decision. UFC 200 sold over 1 million pay-per-views. Everyone was happy the UFC made their money. And then weeks later, the bomb dropped. Brock had failed both his in-competition and out-of-competition drug tests. He tested positive for clomiphene, an estrogen blocker that fighters use to restart their natural testosterone production after cycling off anabolic steroids. The fight was overturned to a no contest. Brock was suspended 1 year and fined. But here's the thing, the UFC already made all their money from UFC 200. They kept every dollar from that pay-per-view. Mark Hunt felt completely cheated, said he was fighting a guy loaded with steroids and the UFC knew it. Hunt later sued the UFC and Brock Lesnar, though the case was eventually settled.
I'm guessing it would go something like this.
Everybody's on steroids.
Number 9. TRT Vitor Belfort. In the early 2010s, athletic commissions and the UFC granted Vitor Belfort a therapeutic use exemption for TRT testosterone replacement therapy. This allowed Vitor to legally inject testosterone, which is literally the base steroid that all other steroids are derived from. And the results were obvious. Vitor, at age 36, entered a second prime, destroying everyone in his path. He knocked out Luke Rockhold with a spinning heel kick, brutally knocked out Dan Henderson, and then came the Michael Bisping fight. Vitor landed a vicious head kick on Bisping that was so hard it caused long-term damage to Michael's eye. Bisping needed emergency surgery, his retina was detached, and he later revealed he fought for years basically blind in that eye. The controversy grew so loud that in 2014, the UFC finally banned TRT completely under pressure from regulators and fans. When Vitor came back to fight Chris Weidman in May 2015, without TRT, he looked like a completely different person. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight, got destroyed by Weidman, and was never the same elite fighter again. It proved what everyone suspected: the TRT wasn't therapy, it was performance enhancement.
Vitor, you've accomplished so much in the sport. You've won championships. If people only want to talk about TRT, does that annoy you? Does that drive you crazy that you've done so much and all people want to talk about is TRT?
Of course not. It's part of history, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm cool, man. I have peace. I have peace. Whatever you guys want to talk about, that's what I'm here for. You know? That's my duty as an athlete. You gotta embrace whatever you guys want to talk about it. So I don't get to choose what you ask me, but you cannot choose what I answer. So it's like we're working together, and I think you just gotta do what you gotta do.
10. Anderson Silva failed drug tests. Anderson Silva was the greatest middleweight champion of all time, with 16 straight wins in the UFC, and for years was considered the pound-for-pound best fighter on the planet. But in 2015, his legacy took a catastrophic hit. After his fight with Nick Diaz at UFC 183 in January 2015, Anderson tested positive for multiple banned substances. These weren't tainted supplements, these weren't accident contamination, these were drostanolone and androstane, straight-up anabolic steroids.
So Anderson Silva had a pre-fight test, and that test was on January 9th. Anderson Silva tested positive in his post-fight PED drug test.
Anderson claimed he took a sexual performance enhancement drug from Thailand and didn't know it contained steroids. Nevada suspended him 1 year and fined him nearly $400,000. But here's the thing, this wasn't his only offense. In 2017, Anderson tested positive again, this time for hydrochlorothiazide and methyl testosterone before a planned fight with Kelvin Gastelum. That fight was canceled and Anderson received another suspension. And then in 2019, he tested positive once again before his fight with Daniel Cormier. Suddenly, the greatest title run in UFC history was under a massive cloud of suspicion. Fans started asking. The uncomfortable question was Anderson on steroids during his legendary reign from 2006 to 2013. How much of his supernatural precision and reaction time was actually PED enhanced? Anderson was never the same after these revelations, and it cast a permanent shadow over one of the greatest careers in combat sports history. 11. TJ Dillashaw, EPO plus shoulder. Disaster. TJ Dillashaw is one of the most competitive and driven people to ever compete in MMA, and that obsessive competitiveness actually got him in massive trouble twice. First, in January 2019, TJ decided to cut down from bantamweight 135 pounds to flyweight 125 pounds to try and become a two-division champion by taking Henry Cejudo's belt. TJ was willing to do anything to make that weight cut happen, including using EPO erythropoietin, one of the most serious performance-enhancing drugs you can take. EPO dramatically increases your red blood cell count, giving you essentially superhuman cardio and endurance. TJ fought Cejudo at UFC Brooklyn, got absolutely destroyed in 32 seconds, and then weeks later USADA dropped the hammer. TJ tested positive for EPO, was hit with a 2-year suspension. Stripped of the bantamweight title, his reputation completely destroyed. He became one of the most hated fighters in the sport overnight. But here's where it gets even worse. When TJ came back in October 2022 to fight for the bantamweight title, his shoulder was completely destroyed. TJ later admitted his shoulder had fully dislocated 20 times during training camp, and he still took the fight anyway.
And at the same time, this is going to be my 4th shoulder surgery on this shoulder. Don't know if it's ever going to be the same. So it's either I sit out, I don't get my title shot when I come back, right? So I sit out. Hopefully I ever come back. So my mind was that, you know what? Like, I got to take the shot. You know, like, this could be my last fucking fight. And I just match up so well with the guy. Why wouldn't I take it?
The fight was a disaster. TJ's shoulder gave out in round 1. He couldn't even lift his arm, and the referee had to stop it in round 2. Fans felt like they'd completely wasted their time watching a guy who had no business being in there. It was an embarrassing end to TJ's comeback and showed his competitive drive had completely overridden his common sense. 12. Nick Diaz, 5-year ban. Nick Diaz is one of the most genuine and beloved figures in MMA. He built a massive cult following by being completely himself and refusing to play the promotional game.
I mean, how are you feeling right now?
I'm pretty pissed off, you know what I mean?
But when Nick tested positive for marijuana metabolites after his fight with Anderson Silva in January 2015, the Nevada State Athletic Commission decided to make an example out of him.
You know, first of all, this sport, this commission, and everybody, they've done everything they can to keep me from being all the way on top, where I should be.
In September 2015, the commission voted to ban Nick Diaz for 5 years and hit him with a massive $165,000 fine. And here's what made this absolutely insane: fighters who tested positive for actual anabolic steroids that enhance performance and could seriously hurt opponents were getting suspensions of 6 months to a year. Nick tested positive for marijuana, which is not a performance enhancer and doesn't give you any advantage in a fight. Nick called it a kangaroo court, told the commission they'd been trying to hold him down his entire career. The chairman even admitted during the hearing that he was punishing Nick harshly because Nick showed disrespect to the commission.
See, those people are nothing but a bunch of crooks up there.
When the entire MMA world revolted, fans, fighters, media, everyone, the commission eventually caved. They reduced Nick's ban from 5 years down to 18 months and cut his fine from $165,000 down to $100,000. But the damage was done. Nick barely fought again after that, only 2 more times in 6 years. He never forgave the sport for what they tried to do to him, and his career was essentially ended by a commission using him as a political example.
The reason why I became a fighter, on top of, you know, a handful of reasons, was so that I, you know, don't have to break the law. And people around me in my community, people I know, they don't have to break the law either.
Francis Ngannou was the UFC heavyweight champion, the baddest man on the planet. But the UFC was paying him poorly compared to his value and refusing to let him box on the side. Francis was scheduled to defend his heavyweight title against Cyril Gane at UFC 270 in January 2022. Literally hours before the fight, Francis's manager Markel Martin gets an email from the UFC. The UFC was threatening to sue Martin for having conversations with Jake Paul's team about potential boxing opportunities for Francis. This was a blatant intimidation tactic, trying to mess with Francis's head right before the biggest fight of his life. But it completely backfired. Francis went out there and dominated Cyril Gane using wrestling that no one knew he had. He won a unanimous decision, defended his title.
It's as though Ngannou will end the fight in a position. Incredible for the winner. And still!
And then in his post-fight interview said, something's got to change.
Well, as I always say, option is always in the back of my, boxing is always in the back of my pocket. It's something that I must do before the end of my career.
Negotiations went nowhere. The UFC wouldn't budge on money or boxing. So Francis did the unthinkable. He walked away from the UFC, walked away from the heavyweight championship, became a free agent. Francis signed with the PFL, went to boxing, and fought Tyson Fury, the lineal heavyweight champion. Francis dropped Fury in round 3, shocked the entire world, and lost a controversial split decision. Francis made over $10 million for that one boxing match, then fought Anthony Joshua, made another $20 million. Francis made more money in 2 boxing fights than his entire 6-year UFC career combined. And Dana White had to sit there and watch his former heavyweight champion making tens of millions while the UFC was paying their champions a fraction of that.
You know, everybody has this thing about Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou is a bad guy. He's not a good guy. He plays the whole, I don't understand the language, and he tries to come off like he's a nice guy, you know what I mean? And people go, oh, it's the language barrier probably. No, there's no language barrier with this guy. He's a bad guy. And I told my guys, you know,
Jorge Masvidal sucker punch. Jorge Masvidal and Colby Covington were best friends and training partners at American Top Team in Florida. They trained together, lived together, traveled together for years. But their friendship turned into one of the nastiest, most personal feuds in UFC history. At UFC 272 in March 2022, Colby dominated Jorge over 5 rounds, winning a clear, unanimous decision. But Colby didn't stop after the fight. He kept talking in interviews, bringing up Jorge's ex-wife, talking about his kids, saying he was a deadbeat dad.
I just took care of Miami street trash. Now it's time to take care of Louisiana swamp trash. Wife, and bring that little kid, it's Carter's kid, and I'll see you soon.
That crossed a line for Jorge. Talking about a man's children is the ultimate disrespect in fight culture. 2 weeks later, on March 21st, 2022, Jorge tracked Colby down outside Pappy's Steak Restaurant in Miami Beach. Colby was leaving the restaurant around 11 p.m. and Jorge was waiting in the shadows. Jorge ran up wearing a surgical mask and a hoodie and sucker punched Colby twice, breaking his front tooth. Colby immediately called 911 and Miami Beach police arrived within minutes. Jorge was arrested hours later at his home and charged with aggravated battery and criminal mischief. He was facing up to 15 years in prison. If convicted on the felony charges, this could have ended his career and his freedom. Jorge eventually took a plea deal in October 2023, pled guilty to 1 misdemeanor battery charge, got probation, community service, and anger management classes. But his reputation took a massive hit. The street justice warrior image that made him famous with the Kimbo Slice backyard fighting background now made him look reckless and out of control. This remains one of the wildest street altercations in MMA history. GSP versus Johnny Hendricks. Robbery at UFC 167 in November 2013. Johnny Hendricks put on the performance of his life against Georges St-Pierre, the welterweight champion and pound-for-pound king. Johnny was landing massive left hands, busting GSP up, causing visible damage. GSP's face was a mess by the end. Most people watching thought Johnny clearly won at least 3 rounds, maybe even 4.
Oh, counter again with the left jab. Hit him with a hard left uppercut. George is in trouble. Now George is in trouble. He's wobbly. Hendricks, another hard uppercut. Another one. Oh, my goodness. George is in big, big trouble. Again. And the right hook as well. Johnny Hendricks. George St. Pierre.
But when Bruce Buffer read the decision, the place went absolutely nuts. The judges gave it to GSP 48-47, 48-47, and 47-48, a split decision win for the champion. The crowd booed heavily, and here's the thing.
The judges score the contest 48-47, Hendricks.
47, Pierre. At 48-47 for the winner. And still the undisputed.
Literally everyone agreed it was a robbery. All 16 credentialed MMA media members scored the fight for Johnny Hendricks. Not a single one gave it to GSP. Even Dana White, the UFC president who financially benefits from keeping GSP as champion,
I'm blown away that George St. Pierre won that fight.
went on record saying Johnny won that fight. GSP himself seemed unsure in his post-fight interview, saying he needs to take time off and think about his future.
I just came out of a freaking war, you know, the guy that hit like a truck, you know.
GSP vacated the title shortly after and didn't fight again for 4 years. Johnny Hendricks did eventually win the welterweight title in his next fight, beating Robbie Lawler. But this loss to GSP is still argued about over a decade later as one of the worst robberies in UFC history and possibly cost Johnny his moment to become champion against a legend.
And I've been bent over a couple times. That's probably the worst. I don't understand. I took him down every round except for one.
What's up with this Nevada State Athletic Commission, huh? Get this man's badge.
I'm just a lowly inspector.
Makes you wonder if you want to fight again.
Towelgate. Daniel Cormier is one of the most beloved and respected fighters in UFC history, a 2-division champion Hall of Famer, and now a commentator. But what DC did at the UFC 210 weigh-ins in April 2017 was definitely suspicious, and he's basically admitted to cheating. DC stepped on the scale for his light heavyweight title fight against Anthony Rumble Johnson, and came in at 206.2 pounds. He was 1.2 pounds over the 205-pound championship limit. DC had 2 hours to cut that extra weight, so he went backstage to try again. When DC came back out for his second weigh-in attempt, he stepped on the scale again, but this time he was holding a towel for modesty. And fans immediately noticed something weird. DC's hands were gripping the towel and pushing down hard. The scale miraculously read exactly 205.0 pounds and DC made weight. The internet went crazy analyzing the video frame by frame, showing DC clearly pushing down on the towel, using it for leverage to reduce his scale weight. For years, DC deflected and joked about it, but in 2022, he finally came clean. DC admitted on his podcast that yeah, he grabbed the towel in Buffalo, referring to the city where UFC 210 took place. He said the burden of carrying that lie was too much, and he wanted to be transparent.
I want to tell you something because I feel like right now is the time to be completely transparent. I think I may have grabbed the towel in Buffalo.
So yeah, DC cheated the scale, and Towelgate became one of the most infamous weigh-in controversies in UFC history.
Cheats on the show constantly, and we know you're a guy with morals and with principles. So how do you feel finally hearing DC admit to the world that he cheated in New York and put his hands on Did you already?
Habib, look at this, you see? Habib.
Towel's bending.
Yeah, so look. The towel went down, Habib, too much. It went to 203 pounds.
Look, look how much he
Camacho in the back.
The New York State Athletic Commission never punished him for it, which is wild, considering he essentially admitted to cheating.
Hey, what made you tell the world, DC?
Because
this
listen,
has been
man,
the world's best kept secret.
Hey, Ryan, the burden of that lie, I don't lie. So having to carry a lie like that on my heart was too much. I'm an innocent guy, Habib. You know me not to lie. I don't lie. So it was hard for me. I could not sleep at night.
Sometimes you lie.
Greasegate. Georges St. Pierre has one of the cleanest reputations in MMA history, widely considered a gentleman and a role model. But if you ask BJ Penn, there was definitely something shady going on in their UFC 94 rematch. In January 2009, GSP completely dominated the fight, controlled BJ on the ground, and won by TKO stoppage in round 4 when BJ's corner threw in the towel. But immediately after the fight, BJ Penn's corner started screaming that GSP was greased. It's an old school dirty tactic. If you're fighting a high-level jiu-jitsu guy like BJ, you put Vaseline or some slippery substance on your body to make it way harder for them to lock in submissions or hold you down. BJ's cornermen claimed they felt GSP during the fight, and he was extremely slippery, way more than normal sweat would make someone. The Nevada Athletic Commission reviewed the footage, and you can see GSP's cornerman Greg Jackson rubbing something on GSP's shoulders and back between rounds. The commission determined it was excessive application of a legal substance, Vaseline, but applied to illegal areas. They changed their rules after this to be more strict about where Vaseline can be applied only the face. GSP has always denied intentionally greasing, saying his cornerman was just doing a breathing technique rubbing his back. But Greasegate remains one of the most hotly debated controversies in welterweight history, and BJ Penn to this day believes he was cheated out of a fair fight. Stoolgate at UFC on Fox 9. In December 2013, Yoel Romero got extra recovery time in his fight with Tim Kennedy. Tim Kennedy was winning the fight, clearly beating up Yoel at the end of round 2.
Romero. Good right hand by Kennedy. Good uppercut. 2, 3 uppercuts. Hit again. Yoel Romero. Saved by the bell.
Yoel was hurt, wobbled, nearly finished. He looked done. The bell rang to end round 2 and Yoel sat on his stool, but then something weird happened. Yoel's corner refused to leave the octagon when Big John McCarthy, the referee, told them time. And the cut man had applied way too much Vaseline to Yoel's face, so the commission inspectors had to come in and wipe off the excess. All of this commotion gave Yoel Romero an extra 20 to 30 seconds to recover beyond the normal 1-minute rest period. When round 3 started, Yoel came out completely fresh, like he'd never been hurt. He immediately blitzed Tim Kennedy and finished him with strikes just 41 seconds into the 3rd round.
Front kick to the body by Kennedy. What just happened? Kennedy is a bloody mess right now. And Romero's on top of him. Another shot. It is all over.
Tim Kennedy and his corner went ballistic, arguing that Yoel got illegal extra time to recover. The controversy got even messier when slow-motion video showed Tim Kennedy grabbing Yoel's gloves multiple times in round 2, which is also illegal. So both guys were bending the rules, but Yoel's corner essentially stole time, and it directly led to him winning the fight. Big John McCarthy later admitted he should have handled it better and been more strict about clearing the octagon.
Do you know that I discussed that yesterday with Big John? I had Big John on the podcast yesterday. We fucked up and he forgot to talk about it during the podcast, but after the podcast, he explained what happened. He says that it was the UFC cut man's fault because he left a giant glob of Vaseline on Yoel's eye. He didn't want to touch it because he felt like if he touched it, it could open the cut up again.
Yeah.
He called I guess it was the guy's name, Tate. He tried to call and get the guy to come back in. The guy wouldn't come back in. So the cornerman tried to come in. He said no. He's like, you got to bring the cut man back. And then he wound up doing it by himself.
It was the perfect storm.
He said he fucked up. He said Yoel was definitely playing it off. And he said, but if he had to do it differently, he would have, A, made Yoel stand up, and B, he would have made sure that fucking cut man didn't leave the cage with that big glove.
Charles Oliveira stripped. The scales are supposed to be the final word in MMA, there's no debate. If you miss weight, you miss weight. But when something was clearly wrong at UFC 274 in May 2022, the UFC still decided to screw over their champion. Charles Oliveira, the lightweight champion, was scheduled to defend his title against Justin Gaethje in Phoenix, Arizona. Charles stepped on the scale and it read 155.5 pounds half a pound over the 155-pound lightweight championship limit.
156.
56? Charles was devastated. He'd made 155 pounds dozens of times in his career, never had an issue. But here's where it gets suspicious. Multiple fighters on the UFC 274 card reported that the backstage scale and the official ceremonial scale were reading completely different numbers. Guys who weighed 155.0 backstage would step on the official scale and suddenly be 155.5 or 156. Charles had checked his weight repeatedly backstage with UFC officials present and made 155 every single time. The Arizona Commission brought in their official scale and Charles was over. The UFC and Commission gave Charles 1 hour to cut the extra half pound, but he physically couldn't do it. His body was done. So Charles Oliveira was stripped of the lightweight championship before he even fought. He went out there the next night and beat Justin Gaethje, finished him in round 1, but it wasn't for the title, it was for #1 contender status.
Oh my goodness, he's out! He can't let him take his back! Oh, he's got the jump! He's in! Oh my goodness, switches up and grab! He's gonna go to sleep. Oh my goodness! That is gonna do it! And still the best lightweight on planet Earth!
An absolutely ridiculous situation where a champion who made championship weight on every scale, except one, lost his belt over what was clearly a malfunctioning or miscalibrated scale. Multiple fighters and coaches said the scale was off, but the UFC and Commission refused to acknowledge it.
Charles, obviously this isn't the result you wanted. How did we get here on weigh-in day?
Charles, obviamente esse não é o resultado que você queria. A pergunta é como que a gente chegou nesse ponto.
The champion has a name. His name is Charles Oliveira. And the story is I went up to my room I made weight in the UFC scale on Thursday night. Go up to my room, did not consume anything, no water, no food, no anything. I swear to God, in the name of my daughter, the most sacred thing in my life, I went to bed, wake up the following day, UFC scale, it's a pound over. I'm looking at it as a kilogram over, actually. I'm 1 over, and I don't understand what happened. I can't understand. I mean, we're professionals. I did not do anything wrong. To me, it didn't make sense. Other fighters started talking about it as well. They're talking about exactly those 200 grams, 300 grams, and it was exactly the difference in the scale of the UFC. So this is where we're going back to. The champion has a name. His name is Charles Oliveira.
Ariel Helwani lifetime ban at UFC 199 in June 2016. Veteran MMA journalist Ariel Helwani was violently ejected from the arena and banned for life in one of the most shocking moments in UFC media history. The UFC was planning a huge surprise announcement during the UFC 199 broadcast. Brock Lesnar was coming back to fight at UFC 200, and they wanted to reveal it live on air as a shock moment. But Ariel, being a journalist, heard about it from his sources and broke the news a few hours early on Twitter during the UFC 199 prelims. Dana White absolutely lost his mind. UFC security came and physically removed Ariel from his seat in the arena, mid-event escorted him out. The UFC then hit Ariel with a lifetime ban from all UFC events credentialing. Revoked, banned for life for doing journalism.
I was hearing rumblings about Brock Lesnar, and I finally got it confirmed, multiple sources, and so I posted that as well. Dana White is there, and he just says to me, "You're out. Get out of here."
I don't give a shit what Ariel Helwani thinks.
Fair enough.
Who the f*** is Ariel Helwani?
Ariel's colleagues at MMA Fighting were also stripped of credentials. The entire MMA media world revolted. This was an unprecedented attack on press freedom. Journalists, fighters, fans, everyone came to Ariel's defense, saying the UFC can't ban reporters for reporting news. High-profile media members threatened to boycott UFC events in solidarity. The backlash was so severe that the UFC reversed course and lifted the ban 3 days later. But the damage was done. The relationship between Ariel and Dana White was permanently destroyed. To this day, over 8 years later, Ariel and Dana barely speak to each other. The tension is obvious whenever they're in the same room.
He's a victim. He's a crybaby.
Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya has been one of the most dominant and entertaining middleweights in UFC history, with incredible striking and a massive personality. But in early 2021, leading up to his light heavyweight title fight against Jan Blachowicz, fans noticed something very unusual about Izzy's physique. Izzy developed visible gynecomastia, which is swollen breast tissue in men. And here's the thing, gyno is one of the most common side effects of steroid use. When you take anabolic steroids and then come off them, your body has elevated estrogen levels, and that can cause breast tissue to develop. Fans and media went absolutely crazy, accusing Izzy of being on PEDs and pointing to the gyno as proof. Fighters who'd been popped for steroids before, like TJ Dillashaw and Chael Sonnen, started commenting on it, saying it looks very suspicious. Izzy vehemently denied taking any PEDs and said his body just does weird things.
Have you ever taken steroids?
No. That's not something, come on, man. 8 weeks and it was just growing. I was like, this is quite sore. I don't know what it is. And I also, from what I've read on the Googles about gynos, dememia or whatever.
He pointed out that he's been drug tested by USADA constantly throughout his UFC career and has never failed a single test. USADA backed him up, confirming he'd never tested positive for anything.
And I believe in less than 2 years since you made your debut in February of 2018, you've been tested 32 times by USADA. Obviously, you've never failed, so that is certainly worth noting as well.
Not even a little blip. You wait till Paulo pops. I can't wait. And I told you, I'm gonna pop him before USADA does.
Izzy claimed it was caused by marijuana use and hormonal changes, but that explanation didn't convince a lot of people. The gyno eventually went away a few months later, which added more fuel to the speculation. Some doctors said if it was natural gyno, it wouldn't just disappear like that. To this day, fans are divided. Some believe Izzy's explanation. Some think he was using something that USADA couldn't detect. The gyno controversy will forever be attached to Israel Adesanya's legacy, whether fair or not.
I mean, Israel's just a crafty mother. Like, I know me wrong, like, we all know he does steroids, and that probably helps his performance. We all seen him fight with the that hung down. I mean, have you ever seen a man fight in the UFC with gyno from weed? I mean, look at Nate Diaz. If that was the case, Nate Diaz would have down to his knees.
Ronda Rousey media boycott. Media obligations are mandatory for UFC fighters. Every champion has to do press conferences, media days interviews. It's in the contract. But when Ronda Rousey lost her bantamweight title to Holly Holm in devastating fashion at UFC 193 in November 2015, she went into hiding. Ronda took over a year off dealing with the mental trauma of that knockout loss. When she finally agreed to return to fight Amanda Nunes for the title at UFC 207 in December 2016, she made one demand: no media. And Dana White gave in completely. Ronda refused to do the pre-fight press conference, refused to do media day, refused to do any interviews. She didn't speak into a microphone once during the entire fight week. Dana gave her a complete exemption from all media responsibilities, something that's never been done for any other fighter before or since. Every other fighter on the UFC 207 card had to fulfill their media obligations, but Ronda got special superstar treatment. It was a slap in the face to the other fighters and to the media who cover the sport. And it turned out Ronda's silence was foreshadowing how the fight would go. Amanda Nunes destroyed Ronda in 48 seconds, dropped her multiple times, and finished her in the first round.
Tirando, empujando, tratando de mantener buena distancia.
¡Paren esa pelea, referee! ¡Paren esa pelea, referee!
Ronda never fought in MMA again. She was done. To this day, Ronda barely talks about her MMA career in interviews. She's clearly never gotten over the trauma of those 2 losses.
The end of the last fight against Amanda or Holly.
The media boycott remains one of the most controversial examples of the UFC giving preferential treatment to a star.
Listen, Ronda has given more than anybody. If you look at the amount of press that's been done by any fighter in the UFC, in UFC history, Ronda smokes everybody by a long shot.
Mighty Mouse traded for Ben Askren. Demetrius Johnson was the greatest flyweight fighter of all time. 11 consecutive title defenses broke Anderson Silva's UFC record for most consecutive defenses. And he was pound for pound one of the best fighters on the planet, an absolute legend. But the UFC had a problem: the flyweight division wasn't selling pay-per-views. Casuals didn't care about little guys. Dana White had been publicly threatening to shut down the entire 125-pound division. Meanwhile, over in Asia, One Championship had a welterweight named Ben Askren. Ben was undefeated, had been calling out the UFC for years. Dana White famously hated him, called him the most boring fighter in MMA. And then in October 2018, something absolutely insane happened that had never occurred before in combat sports history. The UFC and One Championship agreed to trade fighters. The UFC released Demetrius Johnson from his contract, and One Championship released Ben Askren in the first ever fighter trade in MMA history. Mighty Mouse went to One Championship and immediately proved he was still elite. He won the One Flyweight Grand Prix, beat top competition, and won the flyweight title, showing he was still one of the best in the world. Ben Askren came to the UFC and the results were disastrous. His first fight, he beat Robbie Lawler in a controversial stoppage. His second fight, Jorge Masvidal knocked him out with a flying knee in 5 seconds, the fastest knockout in UFC history. His third fight, he got submitted by Demian Maia and then retired. Ben went 1-2 in the UFC and was done. Meanwhile, Mighty Mouse was thriving in One Championship. The UFC literally traded away one of the greatest champions in company history for a guy who lasted 3 fights.
Who got the better trade? Now, in my standpoint, I said everybody won. You got to come to UFC, get the opportunity to fight. Then you look at One Championship, they got...
I wasn't fighting anymore.
Colby Brazil rant. Colby Covington beat Demian Maia in October 2017 in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in Maia's home country. Colby won a clear, unanimous decision and then grabbed the microphone for his post-fight interview. And he absolutely destroyed Brazil. Colby called Brazil a dump, said the fans were filthy animals, said he was going to make Brazil pay for his flight home. He trashed the entire country on live television in their home arena.
I should have knocked him out. Brazil, you're a dump. All you filthy animals suck. Translating tonight. We ain't translating tonight, baby. All you need to know is bring me my belt. Where you at, Tyrell Woodley?
The crowd of 15,000 Brazilian fans went absolutely insane. Colby needed a full police escort to leave the arena. Fans were trying to attack him. As he was being escorted out, he was pelted with drinks, beer cans, water bottles, trash, anything fans could throw. Colby later said he legitimately feared for his life and thought the crowd might rush him. The UFC was furious. Dana White called it disrespectful and classless. But here's what Colby understood. Before the Brazil rant, nobody cared about him. After the Brazil rant, he became the biggest villain in the UFC overnight. He leaned all the way into the heel character, started wearing MAGA hats talking trash about everyone becoming Chaos Colby Covington. And it worked.
Dustin, you're a fucking coward. Your wife's a...
That's a good one.
Forget about your children, you deadbeat dad. You a deadbeat.
Colby got title shots, got main events, became one of the biggest draws in the welterweight division. He was absolutely right. That moment in Brazil changed his entire career and made him a star. CM Punk UFC signing. CM Punk is a massive star in professional wrestling, one of the biggest names in WWE history. And when he announced in December 2014 that he was transitioning to MMA, it could have been a cool redemption story. Everyone assumed Punk would do what other wrestlers had done. Train hard, get some amateur experience, take some fights on the regional circuit against other beginners and work his way up. But Dana White had very different plans. The UFC threw CM Punk a massive multi-fight contract to skip all of that and fight in the UFC immediately. Punk had 0 amateur MMA fights. 0 professional fights, had never competed in any combat sport outside of scripted wrestling.
The idea of being able to step in the octagon and find out what's inside myself and test myself is an opportunity that I was not able to deny myself. I don't think I would have been able to live with myself if I didn't give this a shot.
His very first MMA fight would be inside the UFC octagon, the biggest stage in the sport. Punk trained at Rufusport Gym in Milwaukee, with Duke Rufus tried to learn everything from scratch. 2 years later, in September 2016 at UFC 203 in Cleveland, CM Punk finally made his debut. He fought Mickey Gall, a young prospect with actual MMA experience. And it went exactly how you'd expect. Mickey Gall took Punk down in the first minute, mounted him, and submitted him with a rear naked choke in 2 minutes and 14 seconds.
Go! Mickey Gall shoots a double and do it again. I think that's it. It is all over. Mickey!
It wasn't competitive. Punk looked completely lost. Punk tried again in June 2018 against Mike Jackson, another fighter with actual experience. Punk lasted all 3 rounds but got dominated, lost a unanimous decision, looked terrible again. The UFC released CM Punk after going 0-2, and the entire experiment was widely mocked. CM Punk in the UFC was a blatant cash grab, using his WWE fame to sell pay-per-views with 0 regard for competitive integrity. It remains one of the most controversial signings in UFC history, and proved that fame doesn't translate to fighting. So there you have it, 25 of the most controversial moments in UFC history, from sexual assault trials and domestic violence to drug cheats, violent brawls judging robberies, and the first fighter trade in combat sports. These controversies have shaped the sport for better and for worse, exposing the dark side of MMA and the UFC's willingness to bend the rules for money and stars. And trust me, there are plenty more where these came from. If you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to let us know by giving it a like and hit that subscribe button, because part 2 is coming very soon. We're covering unbelievable ones. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.